Welcome to Digital Voices. My name is Bo Tiffany. We're a platform to share what's on our hearts and what's on our minds, talk to interesting people, and share our stories. Today I have a very exciting guest, Mr. Mitch Henck, broadcaster, news anchor, play-by-play announcer, singer, comedian. The list is large with this gentleman, and I am very happy to have him on my podcast. Mitch, thank you for being with us.
Well, my pleasure. It's good to talk to you again.
Likewise. So my initial experience with you was seeing you on my local TV, hearing you on the local play-by-plays for the sports. To have my interaction with you later in life was actually on your WIBA show talking about my background check. And now having you on my podcast, it's a weird full circle for me. So I'm very honored to have you on, sir.
Well, thank you. You say play-by-play. That must have been cable. I think that was when we were Young Productions, if I recall. I did some high school games on cable. So I haven't thought about that in a long time. Yeah, you were observant.
So, tell me about your history. So I know kind of a little bit just by reading your bio, really interested in Sinatra and play-by-play at an age of 7. I found that pretty interesting. I know that you're a kind of a complex individual. You're a comedian. You know sports trivia like no one else. You've had some amazing interviews over the course of your life. Where do you want to start?
Well, wherever you want. I mean, I was always kind of a weird kid, I guess, in that regard. So I tried to hide it. I was growing up trying to be cool. I would hide my inner geek and try to pretend like I was normal. So that was tough. So as an adult, you could just kind of take the mask off and do what you want. Nobody really cares anymore. So that's part of the deal.
Sure. So you're kind of living your childhood, obviously interested in doing all the things that you were into back then. You're doing as an adult. That's got to be fulfilling.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was a kid who was mesmerized by Jack Brickhouse of the Cubs, the announcer, because in those days the Chicago Cubs were on television every game on WGN Channel 9, which was the cable station everybody got in Indiana, where I grew up in Lafayette. So I would just watch the Cubs for hours, and eventually my dream came true. I met Jack Brickhouse because we knew a local sports writer who got us up to the press box area, and I shook his hand. I was 8 years old. I thought I was shaking hands with the king or the president or, a movie star. It was like the thrill of my young life. And so I used to watch the Olympics and Jim McKay and the golf tournaments, and I was mesmerized by that stuff. So, of course, I wanted to be a sports announcer just like they were, and that's kind of what started the whole thing. In terms of Sinatra, I would listen to my parents' records. In those days, we didn't have CDs or anything. I mean, even that was before 8-track. So I would listen to my parents' albums, and I remember being mesmerized by this man's voice. He was older then, but still had range and still had texture. It was before he got really old at the end. So he was still really good. I think better because he had more timbre in his voice. Mm-hmm. I was just enchanted by that voice. It was just incredible. And if you go back and listen to those songs in the late 60s, early 70s, I think you'll know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, I do. I was born in 74. So I'm old enough just to remember what my parents listened to and what my grandparents listened to.
Right.
The Rat Pack definitely made an impression on me too. There's a sound and a smoothness to Frank's voice, that timbre that you were talking about. I've been told I have a little bit of that. I would say that you definitely have a little bit of that, which is what makes you such a good announcer on radio. You have a voice for radio. How many times have you been told that in your life?
I get told that a few times. I think your voice is better than mine. I never like listening to my own voice. I think most people are that way because I've got too much gravel and, I got to really punch it. I got to work on that. Somehow I talk in the back of my throat, which is not good. So believe me, anybody that does any kind of performance, I think is self-conscious about that. I mean, it's universal.
Absolutely. And the same way, I think I sound kind of nasally. we just shouldn't listen to ourselves sometimes. Maybe that's
you have good pipes. Nasal is okay. You have good pipes.
Thank you.
So you have a deep resonant tone, which Frank had, but I'm talking really specifically about sort of mid-60s to early 70s.
Mm-hmm.
But go ahead. We can talk about Frank all day.
Yeah, well, so you've then become a performer singing a lot of Frank's music.
Well, I'll tell you what, on that, I was working in Madison, and I thought, boy, where do you see a Rat Pack type show? Where could you see that Vegas nightclub type show? And the answer was, you cannot. It doesn't exist. So I said, well, I'm going to do one. I'll just do one. And that was what started the whole thing. And I ended up with 3 musicians, initially piano, drums, and bass, and then it grew to piano, drums, and trombone, with the piano player playing that bass part on the back end. And the brass gave it kind of a showbiz feel. And I did that show for 8 years, called The Big Show, with I think it was just called The Big Show.
Yeah.
And it was a Sinatra tribute, because nobody can imitate Sinatra, but it's a tribute to him, and we did comedy. It's like half comedy, half songs.
Well, I found that interesting because the comedy aspect of you, I didn't get to see or hear so much in what you were doing. So that facet of your personality came out, and I was like, oh, he's funny too.
Well, I've got to still have it on the internet called, let's see, the Mitch'sBigShow.com. Yeah, Mitch'sBigShow.com is like a 6-minute video of that show, which gives you a little flavor.
Yeah, I watched that.
I'm not going to go on stage again until I lose about 80 pounds.
Well, you had a stroke in 2012. Has that slowed you down at all?
Well, it has in terms of my left side. You know, I had a stroke. I guess the clot was on my right side of my brain, so that means the left side was affected. So for a long time, I had no speech ability, and then my left side is still kind of worthless and weak. You know, it's what you have to kind of fire those nerves. And I worked. You can't imagine how hard I worked on my speech. But the left side, I guess I haven't worked as hard on that part of it. I'm right-handed, so you kind of get back into the routine, and you don't do this, you know, the heavy rehab that one would do to get the left side back, or at least not all the way back, but, you know, better.
Well, I read a story about how the internationally known opera singer Kit Reuter Foss helped you get your voice back.
Sure, yeah. Absolutely.
And there was a couple of lines in there that made me laugh, and she said something along the lines of, "I don't like water," and you replied, "Have you tried scotch?"
Well, that's against Doug Moe was writing the story, and of course, he was my audience member, so I had to tell a joke. But Kit was amazing, you know, as a singer, and really taught me a lot in terms of breathing, because I was never a formal singer, but, you know, keeping the shoulders down and the neck, chin down, and those things, you know, because people sing in their throat. You know, when you sing, sometimes you pinch your throat and you raise your chin. Things like that are wrong. You gotta sing through your diaphragm, you know, your lower stomach area. I didn't know any of that stuff, so Kit taught me that stuff. It was amazing. It really was helpful.
Well, and it sounds, I saw your interview with Roger Stone about a week and a half ago.
Oh, yeah.
I was super excited to see that, because that must have been one of the bigger interviews for you, I hope.
Well, I've had him on, we hit it off. I had him on years ago on the JFK assassination book he wrote, The Case Against LBJ. I'm kind of a JFK assassination buff, so we hit it off. And I get all kinds of abuse from my, shall we say, more liberal Democratic friends about having Roger Stone. But I don't think you can find a better guest. I mean, the man is entertaining, he's mischievous, and he's informed, and he's a bit of a rogue. I mean, he's a great talk show guest.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't know if people want me to interview nuns or just have ministers on. I don't know what the complaint is.
Right. Well, I found that interview to be amazing. I thought both the things that you covered and the things that he's looking at currently was an interesting perspective. If people want to,
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to. I'll put in a link to that interview within our description if people want to check that out. I thought that was an amazing interview. How many?
Thank you.
How many people have you interviewed that really, like your top two or top three, that really just made an impression?
I tell you, I think Roger Stone would be in the top three in terms of quality of interview, because I was fascinated. You know, you learn something. And again, what he said about LBJ in terms of the background in the 50s and some of the dark stuff LBJ was involved in, I was stunned. He did major research on that book. But I've had people in the show who have been amazing. But in terms of just names, it's not just right-wingers like Stone. I've had Ted Kennedy. I've had Daniel Ellsberg, Senator Feingold, Matt Rothschild, formerly the Progressive, now Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. I've had, and of course, Robert Craig of Wisconsin Citizen Action Coalition. I've had guys on. I have socialists on all the time. I mean, I'm friends with people on the far left, the far right. I'm just trying to entertain and inform. I'm not one of those. And you see this with talk show hosts. They're crusading and they go to rallies on the weekend. I don't do that.
Right. No.
It's a radio show.
You're just bringing out that story, and you don't really pick a bias spot on it. I love that.
Exactly. I don't work for the governor or the president or any senator. I get heat for doing things that they don't like, but I work for my company that hired me. I don't work for any politicians.
Right. Well, I know that Jim Doyle had the old governor of Wisconsin had worked with you and had nothing but amazing things to say about you and your heart and your work ethic. And just, he was rather impressed. He was one of my favorite governors that we've had. And so it was nice to know that you guys worked together for a little bit. And
yeah, I worked for him when he was the Attorney General, right before he ran. And, again, I think they hired me, frankly, because I had done stand-up, and they wanted me to try to loosen Jim up, because Jim can be sometimes a little stiff. He's a smart guy, very smart, but he's not really kind of a yuck-it-up type of dude,
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they hired me. And we laughed in the car. We get a great rapport, but, of course, things get heavy and hairy, and maybe I'm a little too loose for that situation. But I got him on national TV a couple times on Publishers Clearinghouse, and he sort of became the leader of the Democratic Party, the face of the. I think during 2000, the election, I started working there, I guess during the period, and it was a good experience. But I wouldn't want to do that kind of work forever, being an apparatchik.
Sure.
You can't really do yourself. You have no freedom. You can't have a life. That's not for me.
Right. I know that in your comedy, you've spoken a lot about your family, at least your boy, and had some really good stories about him. How has everybody been dealing with the Corona lockdown? How has that affected your family? You guys gotten a little closer? You guys locking down together?
Both my kids live in St. Petersburg, Florida. My son got a job in St. Petersburg at a company down there, and he told them, you should hire my sister, and they did. So they both worked in the same company for a few years. They both live in St. Pete still, but he got a job in Clearwater recently, a better job. So they're still in the Bay Area there. And I was going to go see him in March, of course, canceled because of the virus.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, nobody has worse luck on vacations than I do. When I was in Madison, I took a week once, and they had flooding. It rained so much they closed all the golf courses, and I had plans to play like 3 different country clubs. That was canceled. Another year, it was so hot that people were dying of the heat. It was just like record heat, and there were deaths. That was another vacation. Now I have this. I can't see my kids because of the virus. I came to Madison for a few days in March, had dinner the last night of restaurants, March 16th. I ate at Delaney's with a couple of friends. By 5 the next night, restaurants and bars were closed. That was another vacation. So you can tell, if I take a vacation, make sure you don't take it the same week.
Right. And get travel insurance.
Yeah. Oh, jeez. Oh, man.
I know that another thing I read about you is how you would practice your golf hold or grip in the car. And you just mentioned the missed opportunities on the course. Are you still playing a lot these days?
I haven't played. I don't think I played once last year because I got a new job, and I had an old golfing group in Madison, but after the stroke, as you can imagine, that took a lot out. I think I went from a 9 handicap to like a 46, which is not real golf. I'm not like a funny golfer. Did you ever see Ordinary People, the movie?
Yeah, I sure have.
The girl said, "I'm a funny bowler." Remember that?
Yeah.
Well, I'm a funny golfer now, but I don't play. I do want to get back into playing more. Brian Hammonds, who was on the Golf Channel 21 years, I was in school with him. He works for us as a consultant, and he took me to the Anderson Country Club. Brian's a really good player, so I like to play more. I really would. I'd like to get back into it.
What have you gotten into to get you outside and doing things after the stroke? Obviously, it's been a recovery and a slow process.
Well, I was golfing in Madison. In fact, the year I was laid off as part of the reduction in force, or they call it a RIF, reduction in force from Clear Channel, which later became iHeart. I guess they had to change the name for PR purposes. I played a lot of golf during that severance period, and that was fun. But I walk now. I need to walk more, but I haven't played golf. So, yeah, you're right. I think all I'm really doing is walking. But, look at me. I'm not going to be doing a decathlon.
I feel you. I'm in the same boat.
Walk more. The weather's getting better. See, that's the thing. In the winter, you got to get dressed up and go to the gym. And, boy, I was never a big advocate of that.
Well, you're in Indiana now. Is that correct? Working for WHBU. And
right, it's called Wolf Boom is the company. Jay Chapman, who I used to work with years ago, actually he worked for me 35 years ago in sports in South Bend. He's got 2 other partners. They own the company. They have like 7 stations.
Nice.
But I got to tell you, iHeart. How many stations in Clear Channel / iHeart? I mean, at one point it was 800.
Wow.
So it got ugly, as you can imagine. I was like a deck chair.
There you are.
Well, I don't know what happened. I always think it's the FBI or the CIA. I'm always paranoid about that.
And with the increase in processor speed, you'd think you'd have less of it. So I absolutely agree. It always makes me wonder a little too.
Oh, well, I used to talk to Roger on the cell phone, so I'm probably already in the government records.
Sure. Yeah. I wouldn't doubt that at all. So, you're working for WHBU in Indiana. I was going to ask you if there's any good golf courses out there.
Well,
now I just lost your signal. Can't hear you. There you are. I can hear you again.
I didn't hit it. I'll just keep my hands on the sides.
Technology.
I never keep my hands to myself. It wasn't a problem.
Well, I think it's the federal government wasn't too impressed with us talking about them like that, so they cut us off.
Yeah, I think that was it, yeah. By the way, have you ever seen A Greater Worm, the Ron Rosenstein guy? I mean, if anybody was picked last in kick soccer, I think it was that.
Yeah, no kidding. What's on the horizon for you? What are you working on?
Well, I'll tell you what, in the world of small market radio, you're always sort of connected to the world, as you're demonstrating with this podcast. I mean, I sent the interview with Roger Stone to like Michael Harrison of Talkers.com and Talkers Magazine. He sent me a nice note. I sent it to a lot of people. I mean, and I sent it to WIBC in Indianapolis, which does talk. That day, they didn't really have room for that interview. But, I mean, there is no market too small to connect with the world. That's the age we're in. So through social media, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I think podcasting is kind of an evolution in a little niche for people that are not able to maybe tell their story any other way. And some of them are better than others. I know I enjoy a few channels that I find interesting on YouTube and things like that. Podcasts too, listening in the car, are probably one of my favorite things to listen to as I'm driving.
Oh, sure. No question. The long form is very popular. I found that it was hard to make money podcasting because when I left iHeart, I did my own show on the internet, I would have like 50 live listeners, from like 2,000 to 50. But I thought 50 live listeners is pretty good in my same time slot. Had I kept that up, in hindsight, what we should have done is built an online radio station and built that core of 50 to 150 to 500. That was the plan I should have done because, frankly, millions of people do podcasts. So we would interview big names and sell it on Facebook ads, and it just wasn't, we'd get like 8,000 clicks. But you need, 300,000 clicks, know.
Yeah.
So in hindsight, we probably should have just used the base we had and tried to build it up.
What's your suggestion for a guy like me trying to get a podcast off the ground, trying to gain exposure?
I would say unlike broadcasting, narrower the better. If you find your niche, or niche, like we mentioned the JFK assassination. If I did a podcast on the JFK assassination, I could have every crackpot in the world tuning into that podcast, right? Mm-hmm. So you find your niche, whatever that is. Now, for me, I've had people tell me I should do a college basketball podcast, but, there are a lot of those. But the point is you got to find that niche. You can't just do a general show, like a general talk show, because it's not going to do it for you, Mm-hmm. Unless you're a big-name celebrity. I know, what is the guy that does WTF with, is it Mark? I'll think of it. But the guy that does it out of his garage in Los Angeles. He has millions of people now following his podcast.
Mark Maron? Or Maron?
Mark Maron, yeah. WTF with Mark Maron. I won't spell out WTF or sound it out. But the point of it is he has millions of people.
Yeah.
So he can sell it. Bill Simmons, the Boston Celtics writer, fan, he's been ESPN. He has a podcast, and a lot of people follow him. But, I didn't have that kind of broad celebrity to do that. So in hindsight, I should have built up from the grassroots, and we could have had but I would have been selling digital ads for $15. Let's face it, that would have been the beginning. Mm-hmm. I was a stroke survivor in my mid-50s who didn't really want to do that. So, but that's, but you find your niche, man. Talk to maybe celebrities that have retired or something, and do that, or find something where there's an interest like that. I once had an idea for a show where I would interview old golfers and show the highlights of their great moments, But, whatever it is, you find a niche, find your little narrow path. That's what I would suggest.
You've been in broadcast now for I don't know, close to 40 years or over 40 years?
Well, I was on my high school radio station and college radio station, and I've been in the business every year except the 1 year I worked for Jim Doyle. So,
how is the evolution of technology? Has it been difficult to stay on top of the different media platforms?
Believe it or not, until this recent coronavirus, I was always spoiled. I had engineers and producers, and I was just the guy that talked and BS'd and set up the content. But given the current situation, we had to furlough a couple of producers. I'm out. I'm running my own board for the first time in 36 years. You can imagine that. And learning how to take the Roger Stone Show out of the archive and email. I'm learning this basic stuff that I should have known years ago, but I never had to worry about any of that stuff.
Right. Do you think everybody's coming back? I mean, once the lockdown is over, are you going to be able to bring those people back, or is this going to be affecting you and us for a longer period of time than maybe some of the portrayal has been on the news?
Well, I hope we can, by the way, in what you're talking about, because it frees up my hands to maybe look stuff up on my phone during the show, which I prefer. But, and you don't want to sound clunky in any way when you're waiting for somebody to call you. By the way, when they call you, always call them, the phone guest, because they always call you while you're talking. They never call you during the commercial. You tell them to, but they always call 5 minutes late. So I now do all the calls. I thought, I won't have to call. You can just call me. Well, that doesn't work. But I think in that regard, a lot of corporate meetings online, like Zoom meetings. I think that's going to continue because companies are going to say, why do we spend all this money on flights? We can just do a Zoom meeting. I think that will be a permanent change. Radio, similar. Well, let's face it. Budget cuts are realities. I was part of one in 2014. Cameras now in news, TV news. I never had to run a camera when I was in news. There was always a photographer. But now, if you get hired as a young reporter, you got to shoot the story too. So that's all part of downsizing and streamlining costs. But corporate will still have their golf outing in San Diego and spend
right
$10,000 on a wine bill. That won't change.
How has things changed for you going from WIBA to Indiana? Is it a lot of the same, a lot of differences?
Well, it's still show business, and I can still talk to the national guests that I've built up over the years because I'm calling them and they work with me there. So they'll do an interview. Like tomorrow, I've got Charles Franklin of the Marquette Law School political scientist pollster, who you probably heard of, who's a big-time name in Wisconsin. He's the pollster I've ever talked to, and he's going to be on my show tomorrow. And so, yeah, I mentioned Matt Rothschild, Robert Craig. I still have people on the show from Wisconsin. And then nationally, there's a guy named Bill Wilson, who's a American Research Foundation, very smart guest. Ironically, there aren't a lot of conservative guests locally because it's a very democratic town. A former mecca for GM workers, 24,000 back in the day. So a lot of Democrats here, and all the politicians are Democrat. So I don't really have conservatives on the show locally. So I might put some on nationally to kind of feed the beast a bit, red meat for the troop. They say talk radio, if you know. I used to call it a gay bar for conservatives. It's where they hang out.
I like that.
You got to feed the beast.
Right. So how are people in Wisconsin and nationwide finding you? What's the best way for us to find you? Is it by going to the station's website, or do you have one for yourself?
Just stream. Yeah, we stream 1240whbu.com. That's our website. You stream there, so you can hear the show live stream, and we keep the shows on that website posted for 7 days. And if I want to pull something out, I'll do it, but... I had a guy named Gerald Salenti, who's really a wild man, economic trends forecaster, the Trends Journal, New York guy. He calls names of all the politicians as the Republicans and the Democrats. I mean, the guy's a great guest, but he offends people. People don't like me. But I posted that interview. You'll see it on Facebook if you're a Facebook friend.
Yeah.
Today. That's a really entertaining interview. So, but you're right about Spreaker. I was a member once. I kind of ended as I moved, but I'm going to get back in on that train. But I think to post every day and to have content every day, you need to post something with universal appeal. You just post interviews here and there. I'm not sure that's going to work. But again, somebody will like it maybe. I mean, there might be 3 people out there that would listen to it. I don't know, but
it's evolving. For me on my platform, I know it's kind of about stories. We see a lot of portrayals and a lot of putting a front on when you look at news and you look at TV and things like that. Having this opportunity to talk with people like you in this kind of venue where it's one-on-one, I have a better insight to you than I probably ever have before. I feel, you're a normal, smart individual who has affected many of our lives with the work that you've done in a positive way. So
you're too kind. I never ever consider myself any better than anybody else. I think there's what leads to the perceived ego of on-air people is probably an underlying insecurity. People always want attention and awards, and they go to, there was an award in Madison we used to get. I won't even mention it. I guess it had to do with Madison Magazine. And I won one of those 3 times. I never talked about it, didn't put anything on the wall, nothing like that. Didn't ask people to vote for me, nothing. But somebody else in the building won it the first time after asking people to vote for her in the magazine, and then put a framed picture of it on the wall outside the studio. And, it's not my cup of tea, I don't like banquets. I don't like awards. I don't like any of that stuff. If you did a good job. One knows that. You care about your work. You know whether you did a good job or not.
Absolutely.
And I always thought that award stuff, and I always thought it was BS.
It's you enjoy what you're doing. What you're doing is real. It's not for recognition. It's not for the awards. It's not for the trophies. I like that because it makes it real, and it makes it more personable and something that I can connect to more.
Well, that's kind. And frankly, too, most people who listen to talk radio, they do that for one reason, so that they can know that the host agrees with them. So they can say, I was right again today. I was right again. If somebody says, I like that guy, that means that guy agrees with them. Because bias is only if I disagree with you, I'm biased. If I don't disagree with you, if we agree, I'm not biased. Because you are right. You're the listener. You're never wrong. You're always right. So that's the way that works, by the way. Conservatives listen to Fox or watch Fox. Liberals watch MSNBC. And then that's the way it is now. Everybody's in their own bubble. I've got family members that have MSNBC on 24/7 in case they have to go to the bathroom at 3 a.m. It's still on.
It's difficult for me because each one of those channels has their own spin. And so I used to have my favorite channels that I would watch. Now I have to watch all of them just so I feel like I'm well-rounded.
Right. I do that too. And sometimes, it's too much for me either way.
Me too.
I think Chris Wallace is a pretty good journalist.
Absolutely.
And I'm trying to think of the other ones. I just, it's hard. Right. I think Jonathan Karl's okay at ABC. Certainly he's left of center, but he's not really just too much to take like Jim Acosta of CNN. I miss Tim Russert, who worked his whole life for Democrats, but I thought he was a great host of Meet the Press. He was tough on both parties.
Yeah.
I miss that, and I try to be that guy. I don't want to carry the water for anybody. It just bores me. I have no desire to march in lockstep with anybody. And frankly, when I worked for Jim Doyle, I got to confess, I was communication director, but when the reporters would call me, I actually sympathized with the reporters, but sometimes more than I did the fact that I had to spin all the time for the boss.
Mm-hmm.
I hope he doesn't hear this podcast, but I did. I was yelling at reporters, yelling at editors, screaming at them on the phone. You can imagine how that can be kind of distasteful.
Yeah. I want to pick your brain on 2 things, and I know you're a busy guy, so I won't keep you much longer.
No, that's fine.
One is your opinion on the last 4 years of presidency and how that's changed us as a country and how we're being viewed globally.
Well, it's funny you should ask that because I have weekly phone conversations with friends of mine of all persuasions, and I'll talk to my Democratic friend who's a good friend. We used to have breakfast once a week, and of course, he hates Trump. And I said, well, when's the last time you voted for a Republican for president? And he said, never. My family members have never voted for a Republican, ever, whether it's Mitt Romney or John McCain or Donald Trump. So Donald Trump's behavior, which they are sickened by, has no bearing on their vote. Mitt Romney was a gentleman. Can we agree he was a perfect gentleman?
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't vote for him either because he was a Republican. So I would say that the impact of Donald Trump's actions or lack thereof or his vulgar language or whatever has almost no impact on the vote. There's a very tiny, tiny percentage of independents. How many independents do you know? How many undecideds do you know?
Hardly any.
No, it's baked in the cake. Donald Trump could be naked running around the White House and the lawn, flipping off the world, and his vote base wouldn't change.
Mm-hmm.
That's the bottom line.
It's scary. There's a party allegiance that you have, that it doesn't matter what they do, you're still required as a Democrat or Republican or whatever to fall in line and be supportive.
And most people do that when they're like 9 years old. They hear their parents talk, and so they're a Democrat or a Republican for the rest of their lives.
Right.
And I just find that, of course, I'm in a state where, Trump's going to win by 20 to 30 points, so I might vote for you. I mean, I'm one of those strategic voters where I could vote for somebody like the coach of the Boston Celtics. I have high regard for Brad Stevens, by the way. I might vote for him. I think you do a great job.
So the last question I wanted to really get your opinion on, coronavirus. How are you looking at this pandemic? Are we handling it appropriately? What do you think about the opening up?
I have my doubts, and I asked this question. I asked you this. I asked doctors. I asked local health officials. You talk about we're going to stay out closed for 2 more weeks, shut down for 2 more weeks, or shut down for another week. I say, how are we safer in 2 weeks? I mean, there's no vaccine. We're not doing massive testing or contact tracing or isolating people we know are positive because we're not testing. So how in the hell are we safer in 2 weeks? Really? How? Are we safer?
With that said, was the lockdown, in your opinion, the right way to deal with the pandemic?
I think in a short period, so we made sure the hospitals weren't overrun, which is the reason we had it, so that the surge wouldn't overrun. Remember, they had to scramble to get the hospital beds. In New York, didn't even use half the beds that they sent them.
Right.
And the ventilators, they've used 10,000 ventilators. Governor Cuomo wanted 40,000 ventilators. So that was the point of doing it, to get a hold of that. We still don't have enough testing supplies, but I guess we're doing better on the swabs and the masks and the ventilators. But, I mean, that was the point of that. So now we all have to be smart about staying away from each other. But whether we're going to be safer if we stay home for 2 more weeks, please, for the love of God, tell me how we're safer in 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, I'm on the same wavelength that you are. I think that as we reopen, we need to be smarter. We need to change the way that we interact with one another, and we need to make sure that we have a handle on this pandemic without starting up another cycle of this, where we get a new peak and it hits us in a second or a third wave. I'm also curious, too, with some of the testing that's come out. I think the antibody testing looks promising. At least we know if we've gotten it or not. Whether we can get it again, they're still unsure. There's a lot of stories that we hear. It's hard to rifle through what's what, but I try to listen to WHO as my authoritative. Really like Dr. Fauci.
Oh, yeah, there's something going on the internet right now about him from back in the day during the HIV days. Have you seen that yet? It's spreading on Facebook about a former employee, but I haven't really checked it out yet, which doesn't paint a wonderful picture of the good doctor. But, all up here, Sweden gets a lot of heat for doing that herd immunity approach. Bill Maher, of all people, did an editorial on his show last week talking about her. So if you build up an immunity, in other words, if younger, healthier people get the virus and recover, you mentioned the immunity and the antibodies.
Yeah.
In other words, that can lead to building up immunity for the bigger community. But by hiding and isolating, you're avoiding that. You're not building immunity. You're sort of, you're hiding from that. So therefore, you have the ground is set for a second surge. Mm-hmm. So in Sweden, they've done the herd immunity policy. They've tried to isolate vulnerable areas, but they have no more of a problem than Ireland, and Ireland does a crackdown, does a lockdown. So maybe Sweden in the end will have fewer cases because they've done this herd immunity strategy. I don't know. To me, there's room for debate on this. Just because the experts, quote unquote, tell us we have to be 6 feet apart and stay at home, it doesn't mean they're right.
Yeah, I saw something about the cough and how far that actually spreads, and if it's a hard cough, it can go up to 12 feet. I've
heard that. I've heard 27 feet. You hear all this stuff.
Yeah, regardless, there's going to be situations that it spreads farther than the 6 feet. suggested.
Oh, sure it does. But, Bo, here's some numbers. Indiana has 6.8 million people, 1,300 deaths from the coronavirus. And again, these are people with other health ailments, but if they have the coronavirus, it's listed as a death caused by the coronavirus. Never mind that high blood pressure, they're obese,
right,
or had diabetes. That stuff really doesn't matter. It's counted as a COVID-19 death. And even given that, we've got 1,300 deaths out of 6.8 million people on May 7th. Now, is that enough to justify shutting down the economy and having a depression?
Right.
I would say it's not.
I would agree with that.
Now, are we going to have to run up and kiss each other and French kiss? No. You know.
We don't need to be stupid about our interactions. I think that rather than a lockdown, if we would have just practiced social distancing and been smarter, that would have been less impactful on our country. Like you just stated, this second depression that we're getting into and how long the effects of the lockdown are going to stay with us. I mean, I've read things where, we might feel this for the next 5 years or more.
It's possible. And again, the question I keep coming back to is how are we safer in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month? And no one's answered that question. Now, if you said, well, look, Mitch, we're ramping up the testing. We're going to have platforms now in every city of under 30,000 in the country by next Saturday. Okay, fine. Then, now we're talking. Okay, we can contact trace. Who did they talk to the last 5 days? Live with them. We can then isolate the people who are positive and isolate them, quarantine them, and manage the virus. But guess what? We're nowhere near that.
Yeah, I agree.
You know who did that? Who did that? South Korea, Taiwan, Germany, New Zealand, Czech Republic. They did that, and their numbers are better. I think in Taiwan, of 13 million people, they have 30 deaths. 30.
Yeah, that's amazing considering they have the lowest. Isn't it the lowest percentage of deaths per infected?
I believe that's correct. Only 13 million. But, I mean, we in February, let's face it, but, I mean, the president was playing golf and doing rallies, but, hey, Nancy Pelosi was in Chinatown. Come on out. Let's have fun.
Yeah.
I mean, even Fauci, if you watch his sound bites in February, well, it's unlikely this will affect our way of life. It will affect our life. It was in late February. So, and he's the king of knowledge.
Right.
On March 1st, we had one death. Okay, who was going to shut down? Yeah, the president should have done social distancing. No, the country wasn't going to shut down over one death. No way in hell.
Have you locked yourself away during this time?
Well, it's funny. I posted on Facebook that I've been social distancing for many years, and now I'm finally not alone. Finally, I'm not alone.
Right.
But ever since my daughter moved in after graduation, I always say my shenanigans have kind of been on hold.
You have witnesses, is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, I was more, shall we say, out in the world. But now that I'm in a new place and I'm living alone in a strange land in a 2-bedroom apartment, I don't have a lot of social mixing on the table as it is.
Right.
So it kind of comes at a good time. Now, maybe with some more weight loss and eating apples on the weekend, maybe that'll change.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, my time with you has been a pleasure. I will continue to look forward to you on your broadcasts, listening to your interviews, listening to how insightful your opinions are on this and that. I love the fact that in your broadcasts, you don't really spin it in a certain direction. You just ask the questions and you let it come out as what it is. And that's one of the things that I like the most.
I appreciate that. Other people were trying to get me to fit into their box, which is probably the majority, but I appreciate those thoughts. By the way, Roger Stone's new lawyer tomorrow is at 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock Madison time.
Excellent. And they can find that at the website that you gave us before. Why don't you give that to us one more time? 1240WHBU.com. Perfect. 1240WHBU.com. I will definitely be tuning in for that. I want to thank you for your time today. It was a pleasure.
Oh, it's been a lot of fun. I appreciate you do a lot of research, and I thank you for the time. It was enjoyable.
Same here, sir. You have yourself a great day.
All right, you too.
All right, bye now.
Take care, bye.
Wow, that was surreal. It was an honor. It was a pleasure. Mitch Henck, you've been a part of my life and a part of the people in my community's life for a long time. I wish you nothing but the best. I encourage you all to take a look at his website, take a look at the Roger Stone interview, and also tune in tomorrow with his interview with Roger Stone's lawyer. Mitch has a way of framing his interviews where they're introspective. He asks all the right questions, and it's enjoyable to watch. That voice for radio, I tell you. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to our episode today. I wish everyone the best. Think about this quarantine situation. Think about, are we doing the right thing? Considering the amount of deaths versus what it's doing to our economy, we need to repace this and we think about how we're handling it. I wish you all a great day.